Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecil Chick, and I use female pronouns she, her, and hers. Thank you for joining us for the fourth installment of the Titan Tabletop series, brought to you by the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programs in partnership with Alumni Engagement and Government External Relations. Today, our panelists will be engaging in a dialogue focused on civic engagement and advocacy in Black African American communities, moderated by Dr. Natalie Graham, Associate Professor and Department Chair of African American Studies, and our inaugural Faculty Director to the Institute of Black Intellectual Innovation at Cal State Fullerton. Before we start the program, I wanted to provide some Zoom housekeeping information. First, I want to make attendees aware that this is a Zoom webinar. You will be muted and not on camera throughout this session. We will have a moderator that will lead us into a dialogue with our panelists today. If you wish to ask any questions or follow up with any questions for our panelists, please utilize the Q&A function located in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be addressed in the last 20 to 30 minutes of the program. This dialogue will be recorded today and posted with closed captioning on the DIEP YouTube channel for everyone to enjoy. Finally, at the end of this program, please fill out the event feedback form that will be sent to all participants to the email that they used to register. If you enjoyed today's dialogue, please keep a lookout for our next Titan Table Talk during Women's History Month. To kick off our event today, I would like to introduce the President of Cal State Fullerton, Fram Virjee, to provide some welcome remarks. Thank you, President Virjee, for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Cecil. It's great to see you as always. Great to have your smile light up the screen as it always does. Good morning and welcome everyone to Cal State Fullerton's Titan Table Talk, Civic Engagement in Black Communities. You know, it's one of our many university events in honor of Black History Month this month. And I'm honored to be here with you and grateful to the Titans who made this event possible. But I especially want to call out Bobby Porter and our tremendous team in diversity, inclusion, and equity programs for all that they do on our campus. Today, I get the privilege of framing the forthcoming discussion about civic engagement in Black communities. And I hope to do so with the help from the work and the words of three of our esteemed colleagues. These are educators who have not only studied and taught, but also made Black history. One of whom I know personally and call a friend, and two of whom I've admired from a distance for quite some time. The first is Jonathan Holloway, who is president of Rutgers University, who recently wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times, and it caught my attention. It's entitled, "Isn't 400 Years Enough?" Dr. Holloway's piece asserts that the insurrectionists who attacked the Capitol on January 6th believed Americans need to be reminded of some things, that they needed to be reminded that our nation's Constitution is worth defending, that our nation's citizens are worth loving, and that our nation's people must be protected by our laws. Now, in response, Dr. Holloway posits that that's really nothing to argue about, that there's nothing to be against in those beliefs, except, he writes, that they fundamentally ignore centuries of efforts to make sure only certain people were protected by the nation's laws, were reflected in its glorious rhetoric, and were considered worthy of love. And despite centuries of civil rights work, social justice heroes, and a civil war that was at its core about who could be a citizen deemed worthy of being loved and protected, these injustices continue today for African Americans across society and across our communities. They persist in education, in healthcare, in home ownership, in policing, in transportation, and perhaps most important for this conversation, at the ballot box. Hence the title of Dr. Holloway's piece, which refers to this James Baldwin quote, "The country, which is your birthplace and to which you owe your life and identity, has not, in its whole system of reality, evolved any place for you. And if one has got to prove one's title to the land, isn't 400 years enough?" Now, with that question posed by such a revered hero of Black history, I move to the second of the three educators whose work inspired me in framing this discussion. Dr. Imani Perry, professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. Dr. Perry also wrote a New York Times opinion piece for Black History Month. Hers is entitled, "Do We Ask Too Much from Black Heroes?" In that piece, Dr. Perry asserts that while this nation has long reveled in recognizing its great American heroes, that celebration has become much more complicated when dealing with what she refers to as the Black American hero. Both American and Black in a racially oppressive nation, she writes, the Black American hero is a figure of double consciousness, often put to cross purposes. She goes on to cite several Black hero archetypes. There is the salvific figure like Malcolm X or Huey Newton, whose outright rejection of this racist nation is heroic. There are Black heroes like Ida B. Wells, who survive unspeakable racism and brutality and live to tell the tale, and in so doing, indicate white supremacy by their very existence. And then, of course, she writes of Dr. King as the ultimate Black hero with a depiction that has become messianic. Dr. Perry applauds each of these and all social justice heroes, recognizing that they and their stories give us hope and courage and guard against feelings of inferiority that might come from not seeing Black stories in textbooks or on screens. But she does go on to cite an issue that historians and activists have long warned us about. Heroes are often made mythic in the ways that are troubling because individuals do not manifest social change on their own. And the romantic idea or the ideal of a hero obfuscates the reality that movements are in actuality not individual efforts, but collective and collaborative endeavors. Indeed, what Dr. King was, of course, was an instrumental and powerful force, but he's too often presented as a singular force in what was in actuality a vast and complex movement. On top of that, Dr. Perry wisely reminds her readers that there are countless other social justice champions who have not been cast as heroes simply because they don't fit society's constrained ideal of what a hero can or should be. These are some of the reasons that recent social justice movements, like the Black Lives Matter movement, have been intentional in describing themselves as leaderless, or perhaps more appropriately, as leaderful, a contention that both rejects the traditional model of the charismatic male leader and also upholds the importance of a community collaboration in this area of work. All the while asserting that Black history is far more than a celebration of Black heroes whose images have become synonymous with Black History Month. And it's this very important idea that brings me to the final piece that I want to highlight in framing our talk tonight. I guess it's today, it's not tonight yet, right? One that was authored by a personal friend of mine and a colleague I admire very much, President Thomas Parham at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. In a recent letter to his campus community, Dr. Parham first applauds individual civil rights pioneers and heroes of Black history. But he reminds us, just as Dr. Perry did in her piece, that Black History Month doesn't only have to serve as a way of celebrating our past heroes. It also presents the opportunity to affirm that we are today living through and yes, actually creating Black history. President Parham goes on to write that when Nobel Peace Prize nominated movements like Black Lives Matter protest systemic oppression and police brutality, Black history is being made. After citing multiple other arenas in which Black history is currently being made, he concludes by applauding the way in which Black history was made in this most recent election, particularly in Georgia. Yes, absolutely. Stacey Abrams is the face of this work. But to both Dr. Perry and Dr. Parham's point, no one person's action tell the whole story, no matter how heroic they might be. And I believe Stacey Abrams is heroic. But as these scholars remind us, real social change manifests itself through the work of many, not just one. In the case of Georgia, decades before the state flip blue for President Biden, there were countless Black heroes that most of us, we will never hear about. Heroes like political organizer Felicia Davis, who has been in the political trenches of Georgia for 20 years, canvassing and campaigning for the Black community rather than as a political party. In doing so, she and so many other unsung Black heroes created equitable pathways to civic engagement and voting in the communities that had been traditionally overlooked, just as they themselves had been overlooked. Together, these heroes flipped Georgia and played tremendous roles in ousting what I think is the greatest racial demagogue we've ever had in a generation in the White House. That, my Titan family, is Black history. And we at Cal State Fullerton, we have the honor of living and working at a university that aims to not only celebrate Black history, but also actively to make our own through the transformative power of equitable, inclusive education. That is why we are here. That is what Titan Table Talks civic engagement in Black communities is all about. And that is why, when planning this event, we sought the services of Titans who are already making this history, both on our campus and in our community. Beginning with our moderator, Dr. Natalie Graham, Chair and Associate Professor of African American Studies, as well as the Faculty Director for our Black Excellence Program, inaugural Black Excellence Program. I'm so proud of what Dr. Graham is doing. And our panelists are no less impressive. Martha Daniel, founder and CEO of Information Management Resources, Inc. She is an amazing force. She's also serves on our Cal State Fullerton Philanthropic Board of Directors, and I am proud to call her my friend. Martha is joined by a fellow Philanthropic Board member, Charles Harmon, Senior Manager for American Honda, recently retired, and a proud Titan alum, and someone I am also honored to call friend. And then we have Dr. Aitzen Wright Riggins, another Titan alumnus and mayor of Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And rounding it out, I think if she's able to join us for this tremendous panel, is Rachel Willis, who serves as an executive at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. Rachel earned her Titan degree in 2016 as a triple major in political science, public administration, and American studies. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you all. I want to thank our panelists for being here, Dr. Graham for moderating. I want to thank you all for being here. I really look forward to the discussion, and I'm proud to join each of you as we continue to enhance and leverage civic engagement to bind up America's wounds, to break down pernicious pasts, and create a more perfect union that finally fulfills its constitutional promise to purvey liberty and justice for all. I so look forward to listening and learning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, President Virjee, for your words that serve as not just a call to action, but the foundation for our dialogue today. I do want to let our audience member know that before we get started in the conversation, there is a change in our program. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Rachel Willis, will not be able to join us today due to a personal emergency. She does send her regards for missing today's program. Now, to officially begin, I want to introduce our moderator. Dr. Natalie Graham, a native of Gainesville, Florida, earned her MFA in creative writing at the University of Florida. She completed her PhD in American Studies at Michigan State University as a University Distinguished Fellow. Her first poetry collection, Begin with the Failed Body, was selected by Kwame Dawes for the 2016 Cave Canem Poetry Prize. A widely published scholar of African American studies, Dr. Graham focuses on gender performance, food culture, and regional identities, and has taught cultural studies at the college level for over 15 years. She currently serves as the director of Cal State Fullerton's Institute of Black Intellectual Innovation and is the chair of the Department of African American Studies. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Natalie Graham, everyone.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Cecil, for that intro. Thank you, President Virjee, for welcoming us and framing our conversation today. I really also appreciate the way your inspiring and sincere commitment to equity and justice at Cal State Fullerton and beyond. And I especially appreciated in your welcome, your recalling of Dr. Perry's reminder that a call to social change is a call to community. We make change in community. And also thank you to all the folks on the panel. Thank you to the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Programming for our meaningful partnership in the service of justice and freedom at Cal State Fullerton. It truly is my honor and pleasure to moderate this panel. And I will introduce our panelists in a moment, but I wanted to make a brief comment about civic engagement, recalling two older documents that I consider sacred in the conversation of the enduring promise of the United States. And I'll begin with the first one. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. When I think of Black communities and civic engagement, I think of how often Black people have appealed to this document, this Declaration of Independence, in the service of our freedom and equality. I think of how my own lineage and ancestry, my uncles, my grandparents, my aunts, my cousins have taken up this banner of American independence and freedom and served in nearly every major American conflict. I think of my grandfather, a veteran of 2 wars, whose resolute belief in the power of education to transform the Black community inspired my mother. And even though my generation was the first to go to desegregated schools, and in recalling this document, I'm reminded of several things. I'm reminded that saying Black Lives Matter is a retelling of this document's affirmation of all people's unalienable right to life. I'm reminded that the strident calls for police abolition and reform are echoes of this document's affirmation of the sacred responsibility that our government has to protect the safety of all who live here. And lastly, I think of the ways that the founding fathers centered happiness as a central element of freedom. The pursuit of happiness is echoed in calls for Black joy and wellness as a centerpiece of freedom and equality today. There's still so much to learn from the founders of this nation, and I look forward to sharing this robust conversation that we can have about the ways that Black communities have practiced civic engagement, even when they were not welcome members of the citizenry. Frederick Douglass's eloquent statement comes to mind, and that's the other document that I see as a touch point. His statements about the Declaration of Independence and what is the slave to the 4th of July, where he said, "The Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions and all places against all foes and at whatever cost." And with that word from Frederick Douglass, I will introduce our esteemed panel. I'll say a bit more about them as we go through. Martha Daniel, our first panelist, founder of CEO Information Management Resources Incorporated, IMRI, and Cytellix Corporation, CSUF Philanthropic Board of Directors. In 1992, Ms. Daniel founded IMRI to provide technical consulting services supporting Southern California. Under her leadership, IMRI has grown significantly and has successfully delivered more than 285 million in information technology, engineering, and cybersecurity engagements, operating in 19 states and internationally. A published author and frequent speaker, Ms. Daniel co-authored 2 books entitled On the Other Side of Midnight 2000, An Executive Guide to the Year 2000 Problem, $1 Million Conversations, and recently featured in the book entitled Women in Security, authored by Deborah Christofferson. She's an ordained minister at Christ Our Redeemer African Methodist Episcopal Church in Irvine, California, trustee of the University of La Verne, chairperson of Board Development Committee of Orange County United Way, and a member of the Trusteeship International Women Forum. Next, Charles Harmon, former senior manager, American Honda Motor Corporation Incorporated, also from the CSUF Philanthropic Board of Governors. Charles Harmon's divisional responsibilities included oversight of American Honda Motor Corporation Incorporated's corporate procurement and corporate services areas. Beyond his duties with American Honda, Mr. Harmon served on a number of boards, including the Southern California Minority Supplier Development Council, where he served as board chair. Also director positions within the Honda Federal Credit Union as the board treasurer and other external advocacy organizations. As a native of Los Angeles, Mr. Harmon joined Honda in 1983. He attended California State University, Fullerton. Harmon and his wife, Jennifer, reside in Riverside. Next, Reverend Dr. Aidson Wright Riggins, mayor of Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and CSUF alumnus 1972. Reverend Dr. Wright Riggins has over 40 years of community, public, and congregational service. He is a pastor, professor, civil and human rights leader, and denominational executive. For almost 25 years, he was the CEO of the American Baptist Home Mission Societies and Judson Press. In this capacity, Dr. Wright Riggins provided oversight and leadership for 5,800 churches, 1.5 million people, 16 colleges, 9 seminaries, and a host of neighborhood action centers, retirement homes, and skilled nursing facilities. At the end of 2015, he became the organization's executive director emeritus. Dr. Wright Riggins also served as a pastor in California for almost 20 years. Known as Rev. Aidson was a mission pastor of 100 congregants. Later, he was pastor of one of the oldest and largest churches in Watts, California, which had over 1,200 members. He currently serves as the mayor of Collegeville, Pennsylvania, a small rural city outside of Philadelphia, where he is the first Black and Democratic candidate to be elected in this position. So it's clear that our panelists have wide and deep experience with engagement and with the Black community. And so we have some questions that I wanted to just go through the panelists and ask them in the order that they've been introduced. And we'll go through those questions. Also, you can put questions in the chat that we can also respond to as we go. So my first question for the panelists: what issues do you think have had the most impact among Black communities in the past decade? And how do you think this history informs what issues impact Black communities now? So what issues from the past most impact communities in the past decade, and how does that history inform the issues that Black communities face now? So I'll invite the panelists to respond.
Hi, Charles Harmon here. I'll take a crack at going first in this. What I see predominantly in Black communities is really systemic inequality. And what I mean by that is inequality that provides fewer opportunity for financial upward mobility in these communities, leaving them economically insecure. to a certain degree and to a certain extent. Second to that is access to healthcare, which I think which has become front and center as of today with the pandemic. Due to residential segregation, majority Black areas are more likely to lack hospitals and other healthcare providers. Therefore, place matters. When healthcare providers are located within majority Black neighborhoods, they tend to offer lower quality care. And often people of color find themselves relying heavily on community health centers, emergency rooms, or outpatient care. And these community-based providers also lack, in some cases, available primary care and mental health provisional responsibilities given in certain geographical areas. The last part to that is over and above the access to healthcare are those who have an inability to really travel outside of their immediate geographic area to even have access to healthcare, which may or may not be available to them.
Thank you for that.
I'll go with the next one. I see in the last 10 years, if we go, well, I'm going to take 10 years in a minute, and I'm going to go back 50 first. And 50 years ago, we had the majority of Americans lived in poverty. We had education was substandard. I was raised in Tennessee, in Memphis, Tennessee. My mother was a sharecropper's daughter. And so I came through a generation where there was an enormous amount of segregation. And so we had all that racial inequality. So if I want to fast forward, okay, because I've been an advocate for many years from high school, because we were the people who had to do the marches, the young generation back in Tennessee and Alabama had to do the marches because our family or our mothers and fathers would have gotten fired from their jobs. So we were the students. So I was part of that generation. And so today, if I look at it, as we've matured and we've gone, have things got better? Yes, they have. Are they perfect? No, they're not. But the majority, as the middle class of African Americans began to expand, we begin to move suburban. And that suburban movement has started a different kind of concept that we have to remember that I would use to describe what you said the issues are in this decade too, is that after we moved suburban, we began to move away from some of the communities. And those who moved out of the communities are those who have the financial whereabouts to make a difference, okay? And so that movement, I believe, is an impact, and that the Black Lives Movement and the things that are going on today, as it began, it united in a collective voice again. We lost the ability of having that collective voice that can make a difference in things of the nature. And we saw what we can do just recently in the election as we united once again as a collective body, coming from every parts of the Black community, wherever we existed, we collectively came together. And so I believe that that is one of the areas we have to work at, or the issues that I have, is that bringing that collective, collaborative voice back together, even though we have moved and expanded, and then being able to get more engaged in civil engagements that unite, even though we may live segregated out. And I live in Orange County, which is only 2% population of African Americans, but we are working at trying to bring about that collaborative voice. So I think that that's one of the areas that is being impacted because of our movement away from each other, not necessarily all living in the same communities as we always have. So that's another voice of those financially able to make a difference.
Yes, thank you. I think that what I'm hearing in both of those comments is this: one, I appreciate you talking about the need for cross-class community, cross-class collaboration, and moving across, geography. I think the first comment with Charles Harmon was also there was something also about geography. There's something about movement and isolation and access to particular services and space. And so I asked that question to you too, Reverend Dr. Wright-Riggins. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Graham, and thanks to my distinguished panelists that are also part of this. And I want to just affirm the responses that they gave, I think that certainly racialization, racism, classism, poverty, and in all of its forms have really been impactful upon the Black community. I think I want to frame it maybe just in a kind of a larger, maybe a different kind of way, based upon my own experiences and background as I look at it, where I look at the whole issue of racism in this country as really being a byproduct of white supremacist Christian nationalism that I think has really taken off in exponential ways over the last 10 or 15 years, and particularly as it began to raise its head under the presidency of Barack Obama in terms of the responses to an African American in office that we, as the president of the United States, I think we began to see a tremendous backlash in this country regarding the nullification of the humanity of Black people in this country, based upon a kind of an order of being that looked at white, male, Christian supremacy as being the end all and be all in this country, that I think has then exacerbated itself in terms of many of the issues that we see ourselves becoming suffering from, victims of increased racial violence, more police brutality, the challenges with regards to healthcare and so forth in this country, that things that have already been mentioned. Just in terms of kind of contextualizing some of this in terms of who I am and in my place at this table, and I just wanted to just say I'm grateful that, 50 plus years ago, I guess now, I sat as a student at Cal State Fullerton. I came in 1968, stayed until 1972. Many of the issues that we're addressing today are similar issues that we were addressing then, and I thought it ended. My first week on campus at Cal State Fullerton on State College Boulevard, I and a Hispanic student by the name of Raul Tapia were denied service at Denny's restaurant. Back then, Vice President, I'm forgetting his name now, I'm going to say Sheldon, but Vice President of the college negotiated a deal with us and Denny's, got $500 worth of free food coupons. I probably still have those coupons with me to this day because I'm not eating at a Denny's since. Think about I heard one of the panelists a little earlier talking about Chapman College, how I and other students from Cal State Fullerton, black male students, had to drive to Chapman to walk Black female students to school. Otherwise, it would be spat upon going to school. Thinking about when I moved out of the dorms to try to get an apartment, and it denied a right to be able to get an apartment there on Lincoln Boulevard in Cal State Fullerton. Being called an N-word by then Governor Reagan there at President Langsdorff's office in the 1970s. So a lot of these kind of things I think are similar that going on today. This have been happened even 50 years ago, but have been exacerbated, I think, as the descendancy of white male Christian dominance in this country raising its ugly head again, attempting to make things even worse for people of color and then various manifestations of that. But I'll stop with that for right now.
Thank you for sharing some of your experience, your perspective. I think that what you say reminds me of, kind of you go back and then you fast forward and think about the things that have changed. My first semester here as a faculty member, I was called the N-word walking across campus. So just even like the ways that, the work that still needs to be done and the importance of that work and how you tie it to, identity, how people see themselves, this rise of white supremacist Christian nationality and tying whiteness to what it means to be American and not being able to open up that identity more, broadly and more richly. I think that is clearly tied to some of the issues that the pervasive and persistent issues that continue today. I have another question for the panelists. In your professional and personal experience, how have you linked the civic engagement to advocacy work? How do you see that being tied?
I can go first on that one. Civil engagement to me consists of many facets. We want to just, a lot of times we think of voting and protesting as being that of civil engagement, but civil engagement also takes on mentorship. It takes on charity and volunteering and giving back, and it takes on political influencing the politics. And so education and voting and protesting. So all of those above. So what I've done in my professional, I've been engaged even here in the Orange County community and everywhere I go, because I think racial inequalities and social, injustice is an issue that I have always stood my foundation and built my life on. But what I've learned in dealing in a community by which there is a very small population, 2%, of African Americans here, is that I've learned to find the similarities versus the differences, okay? And then being able to unite culturally, and then through that process, being able to join associations, networking in the community, and education. Educated on many people. And when I first moved into Orange County back in 1976, many of these people had never gone to Los Angeles. They really didn't know Black people. And so there was a level of education without chips on my shoulders, because I was able to realize that if they needed to know me, and once they know me and we met, then they began to feel comfortable to ask questions that they didn't understand. So I found myself in the many years that I've been engaged in the community, giving back, volunteering, getting on committees, making a difference, bringing others with me. That's the other part that is so important for African Americans. You should not be the only one. We have to bring others with us and introducing them into other opportunities and introducing them into the community as well. So I think that part has been part of the civil engagement, and then being engaged with looking at the politics and supporting those who's running. I'd have to say that in Orange County this last election, we were able to elect 5 or 6 African Americans in a variety of positions in local government, which makes a difference, as you're gonna see as you talk further. So that would be my area of what do I do in my professional? Get in the community and get involved and bring about a change and educate.
I have, thank you for that. I have, for almost all of my life, I've always had one foot in the religious world and another foot in the political world. And I think a lot of that has to do with the circumstances of my growing up. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, 1950s and 60s, the child of first generation immigrants from the South. Coming up under the stories of what was happening in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, 1956, and how my parents were really engaged in that struggle, having a very prophetic pastor who belonged to the liberationist strand of the social gospel, that was both a politician and a prophet and a preacher. And so I was equipped with that. And then fortunate enough that when I went to Cal State Fullerton, the second year after I started, they started the Religious Studies Department, now called Comparative Religion, at Cal State Fullerton, that really helped me get a grasp on the sociology of religion. So putting together religion and politics and the sociology of that has helped me to combine both of those two things as a way to become civically engaged. So much of my work has been in the church and engaging both in the congregation and civic engagement and for the transformation of community. And then later on, after I retired from formal that work, elected to political office. And so it's been both an insider and an outsider kind of thing to me, that on the one hand, the religious piece has been advocacy, pushing, stirring up the pot. And then on the inside, as mayor of this town now, on the inside, trying to address issues of policy as well. And while doing that, still speaking back to the community saying, you need to push me and us to be held accountable to be able to make changes in our community as well. So it's both been an inside outside thing, both with religion and politics, that has helped me as I've worked personally and as I've tried to inspire other folks and to become engaged civically.
Thank you for sharing. Mr. Harmon?
Well, for me, and echoing a lot of what has been said previously, direct service, meaning, giving my personal time and energy, very much so like I'm doing here today, or some of the past work I've done, when I was employed, working with the Southern California Minority Business Development Council, with minority business entrepreneurs, helping them to develop and educate themselves. So they can, develop a sustainable business growth within the communities in which they serve. Working with, Greater Los Angeles African American Chamber of Commerce, Black Business Association, obviously to help, business growth in those particular areas. Second to that is, and I heard a little bit of it, and I think one of the panelists had commented on it, is really political involvement. Meeting with your local and city, county, state representatives. I've personally been engaged through my fraternity, and one of my fraternity members being pastor of one of the local churches, using that as a platform to meet with local officials to really discuss issues that concern us in the community, that we want to be actively engaged, and that we, as a group of Black men, kind of establish ourselves for lack of, we feel that no one else has actually stepped out there. We decided that we were going to be, community leaders in this vein. And lastly, philanthropic efforts, giving, for us, we donate monies towards scholarships to provide educational opportunities for those who would not otherwise have the opportunity because of financial constraints.
Thank you. And I heard a common thread in all three of your responses, like a kind of a touching on government engaging in politics, but specifically in local politics, specifically in those local politics and local elections, and even maybe defining politics differently, as Martha Daniel started with this idea of being engaged, having mentorship, having meaningful connection, learning and sharing is all part of this engagement and definition of how we talk about civic engagement. When you think about political parties and we think about politics, more standard issue politics, what do you wish both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party knew about Black communities and civic engagement?
I'll jump in here again. Well, the first thing that I like to add, and this is just my personal perspective, is that they're both failing us. They're not really listening to what we're asking for. A large majority, and again, this is just my own perspective, a large majority of Blacks and Black communities feel that it really doesn't matter either way. And I'm talking at the much higher level, and that nothing is going to really change that circumstance. But to your earlier comment, active involvement on a local level and engaging yourself with those who represent you and the constituency in your community is probably the most direct line of approach for you to affect meaningful change.
Thank you for that. I'll go ahead and jump in on this as well. I came to the backdoor politics. I came to politics from the back door during the 1916 election in which Donald Trump became president of the United States. I was so frustrated and angry about what was happening there. I really wanted to give my granddaughter, who I'm raising and adopting, a different kind of message. Or adopted to give a different kind of message. That she was so frustrated as a kid about what she saw that it was. If she had known the poem, she would have recited the poem, "America never was America to me," because that's what she was in terms of what was happening there. And so in this 95% white community, overwhelmingly Republican and conservative, I decided to make a political statement as opposed to necessarily running for political office. I talked to the Democratic Party. They said, you have no chance of winning. You're black. You're a Democrat. This is overwhelmingly white, Catholic, rural, suburban. You're not going to win. I said, I'm not interested in winning. I'm interested in giving a message to people of color in this community and a message to my granddaughter that the real issue is about standing up and fighting. Stood up and fought, and lo and behold, ended up winning. I say all that to say that I think that in some ways, while political party politics is important try to make a difference, even more incredibly important is how we mobilize in our particular communities to take care of our communities and do the things in our communities that in some ways can make, I'm talking about the local level, can make even a more transformative difference than even engagement in the party politics. I was just inspired a few minutes ago when the president of the university happened to mention Dr. Parham at Cal State Dominguez. And the reason I was inspired by that, and this piggybacks on something that Ms. Daniel was saying earlier about Orange County, is my son happened to go to UC Irvine. And the transformative difference that happened in the life of my son at UC Irvine when he was a student there was Dr. Parham, who ended up becoming president. If that's the same person, I believe it is. That the engagement of Black people in the lives of young people, not necessarily from a political party perspective, but engaging and mentoring and development, made a tremendous difference in his life and the life of his generation. So while I think party politics is important and we need to be engaged in it, I think that there is a different level of citizenship that is just as important as that as well. And I realize I'm not specifically answering the question, but I did want to say that, and I'll hopefully maybe we come back to that, Dr. Graham.
But Dr. Graham, I'd like to approach it, this subject. It's one near and dear to me because the actual statement that I like to make is that the outcome makes a difference in how the Black community responds in politics or in anything that we do. We learned that. We've seen it happen 2 times in 2 major elections. We just saw it recently happen. First of all, what we just heard was that when we get disenfranchised by the political system, we won't vote, okay? We don't go to the polls and we don't necessarily do what, we're saying it won't make a difference anyway. But what we saw happen twice, we saw with President Obama when he ran for office, you have to be careful that both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party better learn 2 things. Don't suppress the Black votes and don't count us out. Because when we need to pull together and come as a full forceful body of people coming together, we know how to do that. It happened with Barack Obama as president. And it happened just recently in removing what we felt as a race of people, someone that needed to move out. So that collectiveness of unifying ourselves. And so we saw that happen in the marches with Dr. King. That was one of the things we started this off earlier, is that how do we bring everybody together and collectively get something accomplished? We saw that in the civil rights movement. And it wasn't just, as President Fram said, is that it wasn't just Dr. King, it was a coalition of many people and different races of people. When we just recently saw the Black Lives Matter, I saw for the first time in my time living here in Orange County, where right down in Newport Beach, there was a Black Lives Matter march, and I couldn't find but 2 or 3 people that looked like me. And so that told me change was happening in a county by which humanity had taken a cause. So from a political standpoint, I think that both Republicans and Democrats have to understand that you have to do something when you get there. When we put you there and we help you get elected, we want to see you focus on some of the key issues that we have in our community and some of the key issues that we have so that you can help us mend the gap between the inequalities that exist today.
You just might want to add two more things with that as well. Is the scriptures say that the stone that has been rejected by the builders has become the chief cornerstone, and one of the most rejected stones in this country has been African American women. And I think that the Democratic Party as well as Republican Party need to understand that when you strike Black women, you struck a rock. And we saw that in the last election, and we see that the power of the Black women's voices and leadership in this country. And that needs to be said both to the political parties as well as to the Black communities as well. The other piece that I would add to that is that while the African American community is certainly socially progressive, it is still in many ways personally quite conservative. And I think that we see that growing edge as well as in some of the electoral politics that have happened in terms of election results, and a growing body of African Americans that are gravitating towards some more conservative political perspectives. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on that as well.
Thank you for that. I think when I think about, especially Ms. Daniels, your comment about like, both parties have to respond. There's no longer, the ability to discount or not consider the voice of Black people in these elections. And we have this evidence, right? We have this evidence in the election, in these outcomes. And I wonder also at the same time, I want to reflect back on something Mr. Harmon said about this deep, disillusionment, this idea that the feeling that nothing is really going to change, right, on these big scales, and how that contributes to sometimes a lack of engagement or a lack of voting, or feeling that an individual vote counts or matters. So when we kind of thinking about the converse, the other side, what do you wish that members of the Black community knew about civic engagement beyond presidential elections? And I know all three of you have spoken to this already on some level, but just thinking about the Black communities in particular, what do Black communities need to know about civic engagement beyond, if you want to add to anything that you've already said or kind of expand that?
I'd like to share. Just recently, we have something that we started in Orange County called Cultures United, which is a formation of getting talk and conversations about different cultures. But just recently, I listened to the story of a local a mayor. And I think that that's where I want to go with that, what the answer to the question. She is a up and coming young African-American beautiful woman that is the mayor of a city. The city is Tustin. Her name is Mayor Letitia Clark. And she ran just recently for the re-election for her council seat, and her peers selected her as mayor in a city where the population of African-Americans is 2.5. But her history, her grandfather and her grandmother were denied the right to buy a home. Her mother and father were put out and was humiliated in the Orange County. She was born and raised in this county. It was her community. And so as she began to get engaged, she started the Black Professional Organization. She became active into the community. And as she did, she's now the mayor of a city that she grew up in, graduated from high school that she was the only one. And I was so intrigued by that story that the answer to the question that you just asked was that we have to start locally making a difference. And so in the local community, from when we think about voting, we go to the presidential election, and that's where we think about. But the local candidates that I mentioned earlier need the support, encouraging other young African Americans to step out that have, and then supporting them financially as well. I mean, that's a real important what Charles said earlier. We have to give back into our community. We have to help support the different people and our young people, especially the young ones that's stepping out. So I say that we have to learn the difference, that the local government is a stepping stone. And it's also where things are made closer to home for your changes. Just as he said, we went and we talked and we had to make a difference. So that's where I think the African-American people in their communities have to realize we have to start right at our grassroots, right making a difference at everything at the grassroots level. And then we can jump in and talk about what Congress is supposed to do.
One of the things that, as an elected official, one of the things that I wish our communities really understood is it's not just enough to elect a Black official or elect any particular officer. You really need to hold them accountable. Far too often, once we're in office, we don't hear as much from the electorate as we need to. And when I say that, I'm not talking about your enemies. I'm talking about your friends. And there's precious little that an elected official is able to do without the people putting him or her in the office, without writing them, calling them, and pushing us to do what needs to be happen. Because making policy changes is slow, it's hard, and you need the voice of the people. So that's one of the things I would say. The other thing is just really, I think one of the things we can do civically is increase our capacity for building our institutions. I think we need to join organizations, whether that is a church, a sorority, a fraternity, a business group, that things happen when you get together in groups, and you learn skills when you become a part of those groups. And then the final thing I would say around that is, in terms of making a difference, is that African Americans, that we need to bridge this class divide between middle class, working class, or striving class, coping class in the African American community to develop coalitions and ways of building solidarities in our communities that can make a difference politically as well.
And for me, I just have a couple of things that actually piggyback what has been just said. Vote in your local and state elections. More often than not, these local legislators will be the individuals who have the most impact on your lives in your communities. Second to that is organize and attend. And what I mean by that is support movements and policies that align with your values. And for those millennials out there and those of my demographic who are so technologically inclined, leverage social media. Social media has evolved into a major influence for young voters to voice their platforms.
I would also like to add a couple other things into that, is that, as you mentioned, the church has always been a foundation in the Black communities. And I think that we in the churches really have to take a more collective and active part in making a difference. We just recently united, and I think that we also have to remember in the Black community that we don't stand alone on our issues just because they're Black issues, and that we have to cross different cultures. And so just recently in June, Christ Our Redeemer in Irvine put on a unity march, and that unity march brought in the Saddleback Church, Mariners Church, brought in all of the churches around Second Baptist, and all of the churches in our community came together and brought their constituents, and we marched in Irvine with the police department, with the other, and we had several meetings thereafter to talk about what we can do. So I think we also have to remember that it's not just us fighting our battle alone, that we have many other cultures that want to join us in the rights of just humanity. And the one thing that I would share is that One of the things that the Jewish population does very well is that they tell their story. We as African Americans have to remember to tell our story so that it doesn't lose in the generations. With my grandchildren, I tell the story that your great grandmother was a sharecropper's daughter, and that I was the first generation of graduated from college, and that I marched with Dr. King, and that we had segregation. You tell the story so they can appreciate where we've come from. And so I think that sometimes in the generation, we were ashamed of it, so we didn't talk about it as much. And I'm saying, and one of my biggest advocacy today to African Americans is that tell the story to our children and to our grandchildren so we don't lose sight of how hard it was and the struggle that we went through, so that there becomes a level of appreciation for what has transpired, so that they can understand that it didn't just happen overnight, and that therefore they can continue to fight as we continue to go forward, making sure that we fight for the equalities that we are looking for.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, reminder about storytelling and how we have to be specific and concrete in how we share the memories of where we've come from. And because it's inspirational, but it also provides a path. It provides a model, right? And I think even and it also helps us, remember, it ties together the world for us. Like you started the answer to this question with, talking about the mayor of Tustin, Letitia Clark, and how her grandparents couldn't buy a home. And I know that now. That's embedded in how I understand possibility in Orange County. And so all of the things that we can, like all of the ways that we can think about, progress in politics and civic engagement, I think are also tied to what you just said, but then also, the other comments that have been made about the collective, right? I think part of the answers that every person is talking about in this piece or in answering this question is the way that we have to think about, groups. Like I love Dr. Wright-Riggins' comments about what can happen in groups and what we can do and how we build skills and how we're able to create, bridge these class gaps in groups. And also, just a reminder from Mr. Harmon also about vote in local elections, understand, because there's, again, in the answer to this question, there's several points back to who is making change in your community, who is making change in your city and in your neighborhood, and how can we focus on those changes and understand them a bit better. And so I think as we're talking about civic engagement, I appreciate this reminder to come back to the local, come back to the neighborhood, come back to the city, and think about what's happening on those levels in order to create this substantive, deep, rich change. So I really do appreciate those comments. We're winding down on our time for the moderated section of this webinar. And so I wanted to go to some of the questions in the chat that panelists have asked and see if we have some time to answer those. And then maybe we can come back to one more moderated question if we have time for that. One of the questions that the panelists had is, they're talking about, or the audience had, is about Black representation, right? You see these representation and numbers of Black, maybe politicians, or even representation in the media more broadly. There's still obviously work to be done. There's progress to be made. What strides do you think should be made to ensure that voices from the Black community continue to be amplified? We can tell from, what's already recalled, the insurrection at the Capitol, that just because time moves forward doesn't mean we necessarily progress in thought and in organization. So what can we do to ensure that we're continuing to grow, move forward, that the Black community voices continue to be amplified?
I started off talking about mentioning white supremacist Christian nationalism and its impact on the world, and particularly its impact on Black folks. But I would also turn that on its head and say, that impact of white supremacist Christian nationalism has had its impact upon the church, the Black church. An aspect of the Black church that has made some of our churches much more privatistic and insular, and only talking about heaven when you die and sweet by and by, as opposed to what's happening right here in real life. So one of the things that I think we can do for the amplification of Black voices and Black representation is to do something similar to what has happened in the Jewish community. Just as Jewish communities have Sabbath schools and Hebrew schools that augment what is happening in the larger culture, I think that our churches need to become freedom schools, that we need to take a page and go back to the 1950s and the 1960s and understand that freedom school is just as important as Sunday school. Freedom school is just as important as Wednesday night Bible study, so that we begin to educate ourselves and empower ourselves and equip ourselves. I would not be in the place I'm in today had it not been for the Black church that gave me my little Easter lesson to learn how to read and recite something that made me not be afraid to get up in front of people and say something. And those are the kind of things that I think we've kind of gotten away from, as well as looking at our religion as so pietistic and personalistic that we not think about its social implications. So I think that is one of the things that I would encourage us to do. Look at the social dimensions of the gospel, the liberation strands of the good news, and how our churches can operate as freedom schools in our communities.
And that's exactly, I think, what I was saying when I was talking about telling that story and keeping it going. We have to do that. So if our voices want to continue, then we have to make sure that the generation that we are bringing that will follow us continuously understand the struggle, and that the kinds of things that they have to be cognitive of, so that when they're out there, they don't get caught into the simulation that, oh, it's just perfect. One of the hardest things for me was raising my boys, my young African-American boys here in Orange County. It became a very difficult situation for me as a parent. So I was so grateful that the 100 Black men had a program here in Orange County that I could keep my boys grounded in understanding their culture and not get lost in the shuffle of thinking they were losing sight of the fact that, they were African-American Black men, that they had to understand that, and that could get lost. And so I think it's important for us to understand that telling the story and keeping ourselves and keeping the culture, not only do when we tell the story, we hold on to the culture. We want to talk about the inventors. We want to tell them that the light bulb really was created by a Black slave. We want to tell them the story that was really the real story of history. And so that's why it's so important for that question that was asked, that we tell our story to our generations, to our children, our grandchildren, and keep that understanding in our community and part of our Christmases and part of our family gatherings, that we do that. Otherwise, the voices will become lost.
And if I can just add this, and this actually goes to Martha's previous comment on the collective and collaborative voice. There's a wealth of untapped knowledge, insight, and different varied perspectives in the Black community. All you have to do is ask. It's out there. We'll give it for free. Churches, local advocacy group, 100 Black Men of Orange County. I know them well. We have to work to govern, from the inside out, through encouraging, ourselves to participate, and not only ourselves, but even everyone in the community. So.
Thank you. There's another question from the attendees. I know all of you have been able to reach across the aisle to talk to people who are different than you. What are some of the ways that you have been able to navigate what can become a difficult conversation about race? Like, how do you talk about race to folks who are white, to folks who don't have that experience, to people who, don't consider themselves a person of color? Like, what are some ways you can kind of help attendees think about talking about race? How do we tackle this sticky issue?
One methodology that I use comes out of an organization called Living Room Conversations. That you might want to Google and look at a process in bringing together people across different divides, and particularly racial ethnic divides, to be able to have conversations in a safe space where you're able to have some ground rules for how you talk to each other, how you don't interrupt each other, how you're invited to speak, to be able to reach across those divides. The other one that I would suggest too, that comes out of the city of Los Angeles, is something called Days of Dialogue, that was started by Avis Ridley Thomas, Mark Ridley Thomas, who was supervisor now in City Council in Los Angeles, that gives some really good guidelines for being able to have group conversations among various constituencies or different racial ethnic groups around this, and how to do that in a safe manner. And so I would suggest Days of Dialogue, Living Room Conversations as places to start that can be helpful.
That's a very interesting question, and I remember as integrating the first college, the technical college in Tennessee that I went to, and I was very during that particular time very vocal, in my opinions about what I thought the other people thought, what the other whites thought. And obviously, when we came in, there was another gentleman with me at the school, similar to what Dr. Wright Riggins just said. It said we joined together and we decided we're going to break this issue up with us being the only ones, and we had a few other blacks there. And so we organized a debate, a discussion where everybody could come to the table and talk about. We invited the whites that were there, and it was us, because in Tennessee it was just black and white and wasn't too many other nationalities there. But we sat down and I had all these opinions about what they thought. And what I learned from that was that they didn't think anything about what I thought. It wasn't what I thought they were thinking about me, and there's some that do, we're not talking about everybody. So my point is that when you enter into, and when I moved out to Orange County, there wasn't many people that looked like me. And so my friends and were all generally, a lot of the white women accepted me and came in, and they were touchy on the subject. They didn't know how to deal. And I taught them little things like, you don't touch a black woman's hair. You just don't do that, So they laughed at it, and they now understand it. So they're clear about it. Most of my white girlfriends that I hang out with, they know you don't touch black women hair. Okay, that's some stuff you don't do, And so we began to talk, and they would ask things, and then if I said something offensive to them, so it became a matter of what I didn't have chips on my shoulder. So that was one of the things. I didn't carry the chips on my shoulder from the first understanding that I mentioned in the beginning when I first started the debate at 19 years old. So when I moved in here, I understood that some of it was ignorance, not knowing, okay? Just basically not knowing, because I was their first interaction. And so something that they said, was it really said to offend me, or was it said to be, was it said because they just didn't know any better? So that's how I took things as I graduated. And I would always pull people to the side and I would ask the question, point blank, why did you say that? Just a simple question. Why did you say that? I think that, that was offensive to me. Did you know that you were being offensive? So it became an educational process. And so I'm saying that not everybody can receive that, but that's the first order for me, was that I felt that I was just as equal to everybody there. So if you offended me, I'm just going to talk to you about it. I'm not going to jump up and get angry. I pull you to the side the same as I'll do anyone. And I think that that's the first order to being able to deal with racial understanding, when there are people who you have identified with that may not necessarily be the ones that's just straight out calling you nigger or calling the N-word at you, because that's really not what that person has an attitude. But some of the other ones that you're interfacing with don't necessarily have that. So you have to be able to sort through that and listen to them and say, okay, because now if it was because they thought they heard it from the other Black friend that they were around. So, I mean, you get all those kinds of things and say, oh, well, I heard them say, well, you can't say it though. That's not something that you can do. So you have to teach that. And so I think that that's all part of that, the cultural learning. I just learned a lot just recently about the Vietnamese community. I had no idea what kinds of things that went on in the Vietnamese community. And through our Cultures United just recently, I learned a whole lot. And I was so intrigued. So I know what to do. I know the kind of things to say. So I think it's just a matter of being able not to have chips on your shoulders. And if you can see that the person's heart is right, that's the key. It's how you approach it that makes a difference in how I'm going to respond back. And even responding back to me should be from a Christian standpoint, because that's how I feel. I'm going to educate you. Now, you may not receive it, but I am going to educate you. I believe in education.
I don't know if there's much more I can add to that. I think the first hurdle is really just asking the question. And being that you've asked the question shows that, you have an interest in really trying to find a resolution. I think generally we all are very clear on the public still has negative views on the country's racial progress. Again, it goes back to, if you ask the question, and again, to a lot of what was said earlier, if you are sincere in asking the question, then we can have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure who was a part of this call or not, but I just heard somebody just today say something about how important it was to have black and white faces and black and white spaces. That part of bridging the divide is making sure that we show up in different spaces. I happen to belong to 100 Black Men of Philadelphia, but at the same time, while I was contemplating running for office and doing a number of things out here in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, and had to make a decision where I was going to spend my time. Was it going to be with 100 Black Men, which I love and I'm a part of, or with the Rotary Club? And I decided I needed to spend my time with the Rotary Club because there were no Black faces in that space. And doing that, trying to make a real difference in this predominantly white community, as opposed to taking myself back through the 100 Black Men and making a difference there. So I think in some ways that bridging those divides says, where can I make a difference by showing up or inviting others into the spaces where I am so that there can be dialogue?
Yeah, I appreciate this. I mean, that's just a common thread that I hear in all of these responses about. I hear conversations, I hear dialogue, I hear friendship, right? This idea of, I thought of this commonly phrase, like, you can't legislate morality, right? You can't legislate morality, you can't legislate conversation, you can't legislate friendship, you can't institutionalize friendship, right? You can't institutionalize dialogue. And so I do appreciate also being reminded of the importance of opening the door to conversation. Like Ms. Danielson has started this round of answers talking about, opening the door to conversation in her response, and really being willing to take the initiative too, being willing to do what might seem in a particular case to be a little bit of extra work, to say, let me explain this to you. Like you said, let me educate you. Like, I don't want to leave you the same way you came in with this idea. And so really being willing to extend that hand to folks, I think is vital as we're thinking about community and conversation and making changes that are sort of more embedded in just how we walk around and live our daily lives, right? I think that there are things that we're going to do, like you've mentioned, like you've all spoken to, there's things that we're going to do local on a political level. There's things that we do maybe in a larger political landscape. And then there are also these interpersonal moments where we can change the way someone understands a culture or a community by having a conversation with them. And so I do think that that's a vital part of whether you call it work or whether you call it joy or, just conversation and engagement those are all connected. I just have one last question from the attendees. In your personal and professional experience, how can people of color, people who don't identify as Black, be better advocates for each other and specifically for the Black community?
I'll start this off. You know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, there's a wealth of untapped knowledge in your communities. Leverage that. Take whatever you can gain from that and utilize it to its fullest potential. But over and above that, we have to ensure that in addition to the race and ethnicity, that we have diversity in terms of gender, age, socioeconomic status, and even thought leadership. You know, those who are like-minded only think in one particular vein. And so you want someone to challenge your thought process and challenge your ideas on certain initiatives. And if successful, I believe that we'll recognize our efforts to move forward. We'll increase our adoption and participation within each of our respective communities.
And I would further comment on what Charles is saying, is that we are asking for inclusiveness. I mean, we're part of what our whole objective is, to be inclusive, you know, that is diversity and inclusiveness. And so if someone of another culture wants to be engaged in humanity, because this is all about humanity, you know, the right to be the person that you are in the world by which you live, and all of us being created equal, okay? So if another culture wants to be engaged in helping you reach that objective, you should receive it and look at it as being progress, because you now have more people on your team fighting for the same cause that you're fighting for, which is diversity, inclusiveness, equal rights, getting rid of the, you know, the injustices. And there's a person that wants to do that with you. So I say encourage them and get involved with them, and welcome them to join the team, and find something for them to do to help you do that. Ask them what their interests are, and embrace it.
I would just add, in terms of being an ally, I mentioned my granddaughter. My granddaughter is one of 3 Black girls at her 2,000 member high school. It gives me great pain that at 16 years old, she has not had a Black teacher, a Black counselor, a Black role model at her school. Since her mother was a student here 30 years ago, I've been going to the school district saying we need Black teachers, Black counselors. And every time I say it, I'm perceived as a angry Black man, although I'm speaking like I speak now. So it is helpful to me when some of my white neighbors go to the school and say, what's up with the fact that we have no Black teachers, no Black counselors, and how does this impact the people of color and others in this school? So sometimes knowing the issues and speaking to the issues, even when it is not your issue, I think can be helpful.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for really all of this conversation. I took notes the whole time. I'm excited to learn from the wealth of knowledge that you have. You know, Mr. Harmon mentioned that several times about, you know, thinking of, there's a wealth of knowledge in our communities. We have, you know, access to this knowledge through conversation. And so I am truly grateful for the opportunity to listen, to moderate, to ask questions of the panelists, and to allow this platform and support this platform to be able to share this knowledge with others. And so I really do appreciate that. We will, as part of wrap up, I just wanted to thank all the panelists. Thank you again to all the folks who helped put this together, for sharing their thoughts and their insight. And I also wanted to remind everyone that this recording will be available to be viewed on the Titans Together website with closed captioning. So you'll be able to see a recording of this on the Titans Together website. And again, I just want to issue my thanks and just in my appreciation for this time to share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graham, and thank you so much for esteemed panelists today. We really appreciate y'all sharing your stories and coming in and sharing your paths with us, right? This idea of narrative change is so important and so powerful. So thank you so much for being a part of our program today. I want to thank our partners in alumni engagement and government external relations for putting this program together. And like Dr. Graham mentioned, this video will be posted on a YouTube channel with closed captioning for those to enjoy. And thank you to all the attendees who came today. If you're interested and found this dialogue useful, please keep a lookout for our next Titan Table Talk on March 17th during our first campus-wide Social Justice Week, where we'll be celebrating female voices in civic engagement and what that looks like within Women's History Month. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here, panelists. Thank you so much, Dr. Graham, for being with us today, and to all the attendees. Everybody take care, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.